It was the summer of 2022. In suburban Richmond, Virginia, a seemingly peaceful city, Amelia, a single graphic designer, was under immense stress from overwhelming deadlines, and moreover, she had just ended a 3-year relationship. She turned to Tinder, hoping to find some joy, some connection to escape her overwhelming loneliness. And then, she met David. David was a charming, mysterious man, with an alluring half-smile. After a few days of chatting, David suggested a special date, at a place he called, full of nostalgia and unique atmosphere, an old abandoned house deep in the woods, far from residential areas. Amelia, with her curious nature and a hint of recklessness from wanting to escape reality, agreed. As David's car turned onto the bumpy dirt road, leading deep into the forest, Amelia already felt a premonition. Tall, ancient trees obscured the afternoon sun, creating a gloomy, eerily silent scene. The house appeared before them, an old 2-story wooden villa, with a decaying roof, peeling walls, and broken windows like empty eye sockets. A musty smell, mixed with the scent of dry, rotting leaves and wood, assailed her nostrils, making her shiver. David looked at her, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Well, is the atmosphere nostalgic enough?" Amelia tried to return his smile, but within her, an inexplicable fear was rising. She was prone to excessive worry, and this place truly triggered all her hidden fears. Their footsteps echoed in the silent space, the floorboards creaking with every step, like the sigh of the old house. As soon as they stepped inside, a chilling cold permeated the air, even though it was still midsummer outside. The interior was pitch black, with only faint light from the windows casting shadows on the dusty floor. David used his phone flashlight to guide them, and the scene gradually revealed itself. Old furniture, covered in dust and cobwebs, torn curtains hanging like funeral shrouds. Amelia felt the cold wasn't just temperature, but an invisible cold, a melancholic aura enveloping the space. David seemed quite comfortable. He began to tell urban ghost stories he had heard about this house. Tales of a woman brutally murdered right here, and her spirit still lingering. Amelia tried not to pay attention, but every word David spoke seemed to sow seeds of fear in her mind. Occasionally, she heard small sounds, very faint, like footsteps, or whispers somewhere in the house. She turned to look at David, but he was engrossed in his storytelling, not noticing. At one point, a sudden cold gust of wind blew through, causing the curtains to flutter slightly, and Amelia felt as if someone was standing right behind her, a cold breath on her neck. She shivered, trying to dismiss the thought, but the feeling of being watched clung to her. As they ventured deeper into the house, the sounds became more frequent and clearer. The whispers were no longer vague, but sounded like someone calling Amelia's name, very faintly, very close. "Amelia!" The call echoed from the dark hallway, startling her. David heard it too. He stopped, looked around, but there was only silence. "Did you hear that?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling. David nodded, his expression no longer comfortable as before, but replaced by a mix of curiosity and slight fear. As they reached the living room, a large room with an old fireplace, Amelia saw a dark shadow flit past the corner of her eye, right next to the torn upholstered armchair. She spun around, but there was nothing, just the damp, dusty walls. Objects in the room also began to move inexplicably. A wall painting, already crooked, suddenly fell straight to the floor, shattering. David and Amelia stood frozen, looking at the scattered glass shards. A shiver ran down Amelia's spine, her heart pounding as if it wanted to jump out of her chest. She clearly felt that this house was not just abandoned, but also haunted, and that spirit was trying to communicate with them, or worse, trying to harm them. The longer they stayed, the more intense the strange occurrences became. As they were in the master bedroom on the second floor, a room with an old four-poster bed and a large dusty mirror, Amelia suddenly heard objects falling from downstairs. She and David quickly ran down and found an antique vase shattered on the kitchen floor, with no one there. David by now was also starting to panic. He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled with worry. When they returned to the bedroom, Amelia stood before the large mirror, trying to see her face clearly through the layer of dust. Suddenly, a reflection appeared behind her. A woman with long black hair, a pale face, deep, hollow eyes, standing right behind her, staring directly at her through the mirror. Amelia screamed in terror, collapsing to the floor. David turned around, frantically helping her up, but when he looked in the mirror, there was nothing, only their own reflections. Amelia trembled. She tried to explain what she had just seen, but David just held her, trying to reassure her that she was just too scared, mistaken. But Amelia knew, it wasn't an illusion. It was her, the haunted woman in this house, manifesting herself, watching them. They both decided they needed to learn about this house. David recalled there was a small room, like an old storage closet at the end of the second-floor hallway. They shined their flashlights inside, and found an old wooden chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. David opened the chest. Inside were old, decaying objects, rotting clothes, and a faded leather-bound journal. The journal was written in shaky handwriting, but clearly by a woman. Amelia picked it up, each page yellowed, with a few reddish stains like dried blood. They began to read, and the story gradually unfolded. The owner of the journal was Sarah Miller, the woman who lived in this house in the 1970s. Sarah had fallen in love with a man named Jack, but Jack had betrayed her, deceived her and stole her assets. The pain and hatred had transformed Sarah into someone else. She began to practice dark magic rituals, to take revenge on Jack and those who had wronged her. The last pages of the journal recorded Sarah's descent into madness, curses, and grotesque rituals she performed to trap the souls of those who harmed her, turning the house into an eternal trap. The very last page, written in shaky handwriting, had only one sentence: "I will never leave, and anyone who sets foot here will pay the price, with their very soul." As Amelia read that, a chilling cold ran down her spine, and she felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing her throat. The horror reached its peak when they entered the kitchen. On the floor, where the vase had previously shattered, there was now a dark red stain, splotchy, looking like dried blood. David and Amelia stood stunned, speechless. Amelia knelt down, touched the stain, and felt a strange coldness. "It's not paint or anything, David. This is blood," Amelia said, trembling. David backed away, his face ashen. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed from upstairs. The scream of a woman, full of pain and despair. "Help me!" The cry for help repeated, getting closer and closer, as if the woman was right above them. Amelia and David looked at each other, their eyes filled with horror. David shined his flashlight up at the ceiling, but there was nothing, just the chilling silence after the scream. Then the cry for help rang out again, clearer this time. "Don't leave me," and a loud crash from upstairs, like a heavy object being dragged across the floor. They both knew that Sarah Miller's spirit was there, reliving what happened to her, and she was trying to pull them into her horrifying vortex. The fear had exceeded Amelia's limits. She couldn't stay there for another second. "We have to go, David, right now," Amelia screamed, her voice choked. David nodded frantically too, his face as white as a sheet. They rushed out of the house, running frantically down the dark dirt road, through the dense forest. The wind whistled in their ears. Dry branches snapped underfoot, and the chilling whispers still echoed in Amelia's ears. "I will never let you go. Amelia, you will pay." When they reached the car, David quickly started the engine and sped away. Amelia looked back at the house in the rearview mirror. It still stood there, gloomy and terrifying, like a sleeping monster, waiting for its next victim. She knew that, even though she had escaped the house, the haunting of Sarah Miller would never leave her. She couldn't sleep well. The dreams of Sarah, of the haunted house, and the desperate cries for help tormented her every night. Amelia survived, but her mind was severely traumatized. The fear had become an inseparable part of her life. The story of the haunted house in Richmond, and what happened to Sarah Miller, remains a mystery, an eternal curse, waiting for the next curious souls to set foot there. It was an October night in 2023. In a quiet, secluded town in Oregon, Liam, a software programmer, had just moved there to start a new job, and also to escape the pressures of city life. He was quite introverted, and recent setbacks at work had made him even more withdrawn. To combat his loneliness, Liam decided to try Tinder. After a few days of swiping through unfamiliar faces, he matched with a girl named Sarah. Sarah had a mysterious appearance, with deep eyes and an almost imperceptible smile. She didn't have much information on her profile, but her messages held a strange, haunting allure. After a few casual conversations, Sarah unexpectedly suggested a special date, a place she described as one of a kind, an old, abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of town, where ancient graves were shrouded in darkness. Liam was hesitant at first, but Sarah's curiosity and enigmatic charm urged him to agree. He thought, maybe it was just a slightly eccentric prank from this girl. When Liam arrived at the cemetery, dusk had already settled. Tall, ancient cypress trees obscured the last light of day, making the place gloomy and eerie. The air was unusually cold, despite it being early autumn, and a damp, earthy smell, mixed with the scent of withered flowers, assailed his nostrils. Old, crooked gravestones, with faded inscriptions, appeared dimly in the weak light of the new moon. Liam felt a chill run down his spine, not from the cold, but from an inexplicable sense of dread. Sarah hadn't arrived yet. Liam stood waiting at the gate, the wind whistling through the tree branches sounding like the whispers of spirits. Sarah finally appeared. She walked from the end of the dirt road, her slender figure appearing and disappearing in the darkness. She wore a long white dress, which made Liam feel as if she was gliding over the ground rather than walking. As Sarah approached, Liam saw her face more clearly, unusually pale, and her eyes, so deep he couldn't read any emotion from them. She offered a faint smile, almost lifeless. "Hello, Liam," her voice was soft, like the rustling of dry leaves. They walked into the cemetery together. The space inside became increasingly cold and silent. Only their footsteps echoed on the gravel path, and the incessant chirping of insects from somewhere in the darkness. Sarah began to recount the history of the cemetery, about the wronged souls buried there, about the ghostly tales passed down from generation to generation. Liam tried to appear calm, but fear was slowly creeping into him. He felt as if someone was watching them from behind the dilapidated gravestones, a chilling sensation. Occasionally, an unusual cold gust of wind swept through, making him shiver. He looked at Sarah. She remained strangely calm, her lifeless eyes staring straight into the darkness. As they delved deeper into the cemetery, to an older, moss-covered and forgotten section, strange things began to happen. Liam started to hear small sounds, very faint, like someone gasping for breath, or scraping sounds from underground. He stopped, listening, but Sarah continued to walk, as if she heard nothing. "Do you hear anything, Sarah?" Liam asked, his voice slightly trembling. Sarah just shook her head, not saying a word. The feeling of being watched became clearer. Liam felt as if an invisible gaze was fixed on his back, giving him goosebumps. At one point, he spun around and saw a dark shadow flit between two gravestones, disappearing quickly. He rubbed his eyes, telling himself it was just his imagination, due to the dim light and stress. But then, whispers began to appear, very close, as if someone was talking right next to his ear. "Liam, go," the cold, haunting whisper. Liam froze, his entire body stiff. He looked at Sarah. She was still calm, but this time, Liam saw a very faint smile, almost imperceptible, flicker across her lips. That smile sent more chills down his spine than any sound. They continued deeper, to an open area in the middle of the cemetery, where there was a large ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like withered arms. Right beneath the tree, there was an unmarked grave, with only a large stone placed on top. Sarah stopped in front of that grave, her lifeless eyes staring at the stone. "This is where she rests," Sarah said, her voice now no longer soft, but deeper, echoing like a sound from a deep well. Liam felt a sudden icy chill wash over him, colder than any cold he had ever felt. It wasn't just temperature, but a bone-chilling coldness, as if someone was standing right next to him, breathing frosty air onto his face. He turned his head, saw nothing, but the sensation became clearer and clearer. Suddenly, from beneath the ground, a faint moan echoed, like someone trapped, in pain. Liam panicked. He took a step back, stumbling against an old gravestone. "Sarah, let's go," he said, his voice hoarse with fear. Sarah still stood there, unmoving, her face now ghastly pale, and her eyes glowing strangely in the darkness. The moans from underground grew louder, more prolonged, interspersed with horrifying scratching sounds. Liam felt as if something was trying to escape from that unmarked grave. He looked at Sarah, trying to find an explanation, but she remained motionless, her lifeless eyes staring straight at the stone. "She's calling me," Sarah said. Her voice now sounded as if it wasn't her own, but another voice, deeper, colder. Suddenly, from behind the grave, a faint, blurred figure gradually appeared. It was a woman, with long, disheveled hair, almost completely covering her face. She wore an old white dress, stained with mud. Liam froze, his entire body covered in goosebumps. He tried to scream, but his throat was dry, no sound escaped. The figure continued to float dimly, moving towards Sarah. Sarah still stood there, like a statue, without any reaction. As the figure approached Sarah, Liam saw its eyes more clearly, empty, full of resentment. And then, the figure extended a thin, bony hand, grabbing Sarah's hand. Liam felt a cold current run down his spine. Liam could no longer bear it. The extreme fear had made him lose his mind. He clearly saw the ghost's bony hand grasping Sarah's hand, and Sarah still stood there, not resisting at all. She seemed to feel nothing, or she was completely possessed. Liam spun around, running frantically out of the cemetery, not daring to look back. The wind whistling in his ears was like curses, and the moans from the unmarked grave echoed in his head. He ran non-stop through the dilapidated gravestones, stumbling repeatedly, but he felt no pain. All he wanted was to escape this cursed place, to escape the ghost of that woman, to escape Sarah, who he believed was no longer the Sarah he once knew. He felt an icy chill still clinging to him, as if something was chasing him, a cold breath on his neck. He could feel its presence, right behind him, even though he didn't dare to look back. Liam reached his car, opened the door frantically, and sped away wildly, without a single glance back. He drove all night, leaving that small town behind, leaving that haunted cemetery behind. He never returned. But even though Liam had left that place, the haunting still wouldn't let him go. He couldn't sleep soundly. Every night, dreams of Sarah, of the cemetery, and of the ghost of the woman with the bony hand tormented him. He clearly saw Sarah's pale face, her lifeless eyes, and her terrifying smile when she was possessed by the ghost. He always felt as if someone was watching him, no matter where he was. Every time night fell, he felt an icy chill envelop him, and the whispers from the grave kept echoing in his ears. "You will never escape, Liam." He knew that the spirit of the woman in that cemetery might have followed Sarah, or might have latched onto him. The story of the fateful Tinder date, the encounter at the haunted cemetery, and the mysterious disappearance of Sarah Miller remains an unsolved mystery, an eternal obsession, clinging to Liam to this very day. It was a winter night in 2021, in the suburbs of a small town in Iowa, where bone-chilling winds frequently visited. Chloe, a young writer facing writer's block, had also just gone through a mild depression. She was prone to excessive worry, and often introverted, preferring to be alone with her thoughts. To find a bit of inspiration, a bit of connection to the outside world, she turned to Tinder. Every night, as darkness fell, Chloe would scroll through Tinder, and she matched with an anonymous account named Shadow. There was no profile picture, no personal information, but Shadow's messages held a strange, captivating allure. These messages only appeared at midnight, and were often philosophical questions, or mysterious riddles, revolving around fear and darkness. Chloe, with her curious nature and a bit of daring from wanting to escape her monotonous reality, was drawn into these conversations. She felt a strange connection with Shadow, as if that person understood her deepest thoughts. After many nights of chatting, Shadow suddenly proposed a date. A fateful meeting at a special place. An old abandoned house isolated outside of town, far from residential areas. "That place will be where we find the truth," Shadow's message read, sending shivers down Chloe's spine. Despite a sense of foreboding, her curiosity and longing to meet that mysterious person compelled her to agree. On the night of the date, there was no moon or stars, only thick dark clouds covering the sky, creating a gloomy and terrifying scene. Chloe drove along the secluded dirt road, her headlights barely illuminating a small portion of the path ahead. On either side of the road were dried trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like ghostly arms, casting long dark shadows on the ground. The air was bone-chillingly cold, and a musty smell, mixed with the scent of old moss, assailed her nostrils, making her shiver. Following Shadow's directions, Chloe continued to drive deeper into the darkness. The road became increasingly rough and narrow, with wild bushes growing thickly on both sides, rustling against the car's body. She felt a sense of unease rising within her, but tried to remain calm. Suddenly, from a distance, she saw a faint flickering light, like the glow of a candle, or an old oil lamp. It must be Shadow, she told herself, her heart silently hoping. As she got closer, the light became clearer, coming from an old, dilapidated abandoned house, hidden behind thick trees. The house appeared before Chloe, a two-story wooden villa, with a decaying roof, peeling walls, and broken windows like empty eye sockets. The musty smell, the scent of rotting wood, assailed her nostrils, making her feel nauseous. Chloe's heart pounded in her chest. She stopped the car a short distance away, turning her headlights directly onto the house. There were no signs of anyone, no other cars, and the flickering light from earlier had also disappeared. Only the abandoned house stood silently in the darkness, with a terrifying and eerie appearance. Chloe sat in her car, with her headlights pointed directly at the house, but no one appeared. Silence enveloped the space, with only the wind whistling through the broken windows, and the faint rattling of unknown objects inside. She felt a sudden icy chill descend, much colder than the temperature outside. She shivered, goosebumps rising on her skin. She texted, "Shadow, where are you?" but received no reply. She called, only to hear a long, hopeless ring. Chloe began to feel genuine fear. She was prone to excessive worry, and this situation had pushed her anxiety to its peak. She stared at the house, feeling as if an invisible gaze was watching her from within, sending shivers down her spine. A very clear sensation of being watched, as if someone was standing right behind her, a cold breath on her neck. She tried to calm herself down, telling herself that perhaps Shadow just wanted to test her, or that it was just a slightly over-the-top prank. But her heart continued to pound wildly, and a sense of foreboding kept repeating in her mind. She felt the presence of something unnatural in this place. A gloomy, heavy energy enveloping the house and the entire surrounding area. Chloe still sat in her car, with her headlights pointed directly at the abandoned house. She dared not turn off the engine, nor dared to leave. She felt trapped, held in place by some invisible energy. Suddenly, from inside the house, a very faint sound echoed, like slow footsteps on old wooden floorboards. Chloe held her breath, listening. The footsteps were indistinct, but enough to make her hair stand on end. They continued to approach, from deep inside the house, heading towards the front door. Then, a whisper echoed, very faint, but clear enough for Chloe to hear distinctly. Chloe, her name was called, deep, haunting, yet with a strange familiarity, like the voice of someone she had talked to for a very long time. That voice was not Shadow's, it was a woman's voice. Chloe got goosebumps, her entire body trembling. She couldn't explain it, but that voice immediately made her think of the messages she had received from Shadow every night. She tried to scream, to ask who was there, but her throat was dry, no sound escaped. She could only stare at the front door of the house, where she felt the source of that voice. The car's headlights shone directly on the door, but no one appeared. Only the deafening silence enveloped the space, and the voice calling her name continued to echo in her head, repeating over and over, like a curse. The fear had reached its peak. Chloe suddenly saw a figure flit past the window on the second floor, very quickly, very vaguely. She rubbed her eyes, trying to see again, but saw nothing. She told herself it was just her imagination, that she was too scared. But then, she saw it again, clearer this time, right at the front door. A female figure, wearing a long white dress, with long dark hair hanging loose, standing right in the doorway, staring directly at her. Her face was ghastly pale, her eyes deep and lifeless, and a grotesque, distorted smile. Chloe screamed in terror, slammed on the gas pedal, trying to turn the car around and flee. But the car seemed to be frozen in place, its wheels spinning wildly on the gravel, but not moving. The ghost continued to approach her car, step by step, slowly, as if walking on an unobstructed path. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, her body trembling uncontrollably, cold sweat soaking her entire body. She felt a bone-chilling cold penetrate the car's glass, as if someone was touching her. In her mind, Shadow's whisper echoed again. That place will be where we find the truth. She realized, Shadow was her. The spirit trapped in this house, and she had lured her here, to possess her, or to drag her into her world of darkness. She tried to pray, tried to escape the fear that enveloped her. The car finally moved. Chloe floored the accelerator, speeding wildly down the dark dirt road. She dared not look back, only ran as fast as she could to escape that hellish place. She felt as if an invisible hand was gripping the steering wheel, trying to pull her back. The wind whistling in her ears was like curses, and the terrifying laughter of that woman echoed in her head. She drove without knowing where she was going, just wanting to leave that town, to leave that haunted house. When she felt safe enough, she stopped at a gas station by the road, her body still trembling. She got out of the car, looked at herself in the mirror, saw her face pale, her hair disheveled, and her entire body drenched in sweat. She felt an icy chill still clinging to her, as if something had followed her from that abandoned house. She didn't know if she had truly escaped, or if it was just another vicious cycle that Spirit had created. Chloe couldn't sleep soundly anymore. Every night, dreams of the abandoned house, of the woman with lifeless eyes, and of the messages from Shadow haunted her. She clearly saw her pale face, her distorted smile, and the haunting voice calling her name. Chloe tried to return to her normal life, but the haunting wouldn't let her go. She moved houses, changed her phone number, but messages from Shadow still appeared on her phone at midnight, just as before. There was no sender name, only cryptic characters, but she knew it was her. Those messages were no longer riddles, but threats, curses. Every time darkness fell, she felt an icy chill envelop her, and the feeling of being watched became clearer than ever. She saw shadows flit past the corner of her eye, heard whispers calling her name, and sometimes, she even saw the reflection of that woman in the mirror, right behind her. Chloe lived in extreme fear. She dared not turn off the lights when she slept, dared not be alone for too long. She knew that the spirit of the woman in that abandoned house had clung to her, not only haunting her, but also wanting to possess her. The story of the fateful Tinder date, the encounter at the haunted house outside of town, and Chloe's unending obsession, remains an unsolved mystery. Perhaps, the spirit of that woman will never release Chloe, until she is completely destroyed, or becomes a part of that world of darkness.